I awoke on what I think was a ship or airplane, and there was a young man sitting next to me. I was lying in a bed. I have never seen this man before, but he was smiling at me in a way that put me at ease. I asked him if I was dying and he replied no. He told that he and me that I had a long journey ahead, was there to keep me company along the way. When I tried to speak to the other people who were there, I got no response from them. It was as if I was invisible to them. The man who was with me said that he was the only one allowed to speak to me. We didn't talk a lot, but it was comforting to have him with me. He gave me drinks of water and food when I needed it. He told me it was almost time to go, and I told him that I wanted him to meet my husband, that he would want to thank him for taking care of me. But the man said that he couldn't meet him, that it wasn't time. I awoke in intensive care where I had been for 5 days. I thought that I had been traveling to meet my husband, when in fact I had been on life support. Next, NDE. It's not clear that I had an out-of-body experience. I just have this feeling that I saw myself being wheeled down the hospital corridor. When I came to, I felt that I had been someplace that was comforting and safe. I had been comatose for 2 days. Unable to talk due to tubes down my throat from a collapsed lung. I was only able to communicate through writing. I remember having an incredible craving for a Butterfinger candy bar, which was the first thing I ate when they removed the tubes. I was in intensive care for 11 days. From what the nurses told me, they had to strap my arms down so I couldn't attack the technicians who were working with me. The pain was unbearable. Morphine didn't help much with the pain from the crushed ribs. It wasn't until I was transferred to my own hospital room that I became more aware of what had happened. Apparently, I was brought in DOA, dead on arrival, to the emergency room the day of the accident. The emergency room team at the hospital couldn't get a pulse on me. I believe that if it hadn't been for the head surgeon, who was on staff when I arrived via the paramedics, that I would not be here today. He was truly my angel. They had worked on me for quite a while trying to get a pulse with no success, and were ready to quit. The head surgeon insisted they keep working. He wasn't ready to give up being, as I was only 28 years old at the time. I was hospitalized about 2 months in '79. My injuries were quite extensive. I had a collapsed lung, crushed ribs, crushed pelvis, and crushed spleen, which resulted in a splenectomy, contused liver, compound fracture of the left tibia and fibula, broken nose, and some facial scarring. The doctors thought I would have brain damage due to the swelling and concussion. They gave me a 10% chance of survival. I was in traction the whole hospital stay. I can't count the number of surgeries I had during my hospital stay. I was in surgery when something went wrong. I popped from my body and was met with a bright light. This light gave me unconditional love, and explained I had to return as I had 3 children to raise. Without words, I was told many mysteries of the world. There is no hell or heaven, there is just experience. No good or bad either. I had been taught wrong by religion, and I had to return to find truth. I knew nothing about reincarnation and karma, and the spirit world was to teach me to do it right. I had not yet mastered myself. I wanted to stay with this presence, as I loved him more than my family. I was popped back in my body in pain. I tore the needles out, and cried for days. Then I began to hear a ringing in my left ear, and that was how I became intuitive. I could read astrology, learned in dreams. I am very spiritual now, and live each day like my last, though I do not fear death. Next, NDE. I was able to see the car rushing me to the hospital from above. I was floating behind the car approximately 10 feet above the street. I was able to see myself in the back seat of the car. I then remember seeing myself being operated on. At the time, I didn't acknowledge my experience. Being 6 years old, I didn't know how to describe what I felt and saw. I noticed shortly afterward that I was able to see energy in random objects, and to this day, I get a sense of the molecular makeup of objects. Next, NDE. It was the summer in 1974. I was 8 years old with no cares in the world. I used to hang out with my older brothers playing all sorts of games. One game we used to play we named Pass Out. This game was played by one person would inhale and exhale as deep as they could about 10 to 12 times, and another person would squeeze their chest until they passed out. To prove I was worthy of being with my older brothers and their friends, I was the guy who would be the one they would squeeze and pass out. I did this about 4 times before and nothing ever happened to me. I would pass out and never remember a thing. The very last time I did, it was a different story. This last time I did this, we did it across the street from our house. I must have passed out as usual, but this time I floated out of my body, and here I was hovering about 10 feet above my 2 brothers and a friend. I remember them giggling and laughing at me, and I remember getting mad, or angry, that they were laughing at me, my body. At the time, I didn't even think that what was happening to me was odd or unusual. I just had a feeling of total love surround me, and I felt so good, like never before. As I sat there looking at my brothers, I started to go up a little higher, until I was above the big tree, and soon I could see the top of our house. I then started to gradually start drifting across our neighborhood, and soon I was high enough to see the entire village like I was flying in an airplane. As I approached the high school, which is the last building at the end of town, I started to shoot straight up into a white light. I was fine up to that point, but I started to think to myself that I might never come back and I wanted to go home. As soon as I thought that thought, I heard a voice say, "You're not ready yet." Immediately after hearing that voice, I zoomed at what seemed like 1,000 miles an hour right back into my body and woke up with a big jolt. I mentioned what happened to me briefly to my mother, but she just thought I was making up something at the time, and my brothers all laughed at me. I never mentioned it again until years later, when I saw an episode of Unsolved Mysteries, and I said, "That happened to me." I asked my brother years later about that day, and he said at the time that I wasn't breathing and they started kicking me to wake up, and I finally did, obviously. He said for a while there, they really got scared. Next, NDE. I briefly saw both what would be considered heaven and its counterpart. The terrible torment of those in hell was far worse than the fire and brimstone crowd preach. It was something akin to spending eternity with those who would harm others in the same fashion as yourself, or conversely eternal loneliness for those who would, for lack of a better phrase, fleece others. The strange thing about the dark place was that it was a place, and no place at the same time, that you went to because of yourself. No one sent you there but yourself, and by the same token only you could get yourself out. Eternity seemed to be more of how you wished it. While hell was well populated, with millions of souls, it only made a very small dent in the total population of the afterlife. I was struck by the accuracy of the movie, What Dreams May Come, which I saw just a couple of months later. Although not the best movie, its portrayal of the afterlife is closer than anything I've ever been able to articulate.